Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for being with us. I love having these conversations with you. I really feel like we are part of a community. We are part of one of my friends, Dale, affectionately calls it the Rachel Lang Gang. It's our group of spiritual gangsters, and you are a part of it. So thank you. There is a lot happening right now in the news. Last week was a very big week. And so I wanted to dive right in talking about our subject for today. We are going to talk about the astrology of some of the major news of last week on the legal front. So let's dive right in. And you'll want to stay till the very end because I give you some of my secrets to election magic, ways of working with magic, ways of working with energy when there is a larger storyline, larger than your own personal life, that is unfolding. And so I'll give you some of my election magic tips that have worked. So our top story is about former President Donald Trump's recent indictment and subsequent guilty verdict. Now, this has been a significant development in the ongoing legal battles that have surrounded him over the past few years. This indictment, just for those of you who have maybe followed but not completely, this indictment comes after lengthy investigation into various charges. And the court found that Trump was guilty on 34 different counts. Now, I am going to talk about this in a way that doesn't alienate anyone. So regardless of how you plan to vote or what political side of the political aisle you are on, I want you to feel welcome. I want you to feel like this is a safe place for you. And so I invite you, as we talk about these subjects, to hold your own judgments. I know it's hard to do. I know it is very difficult, but I think one of the things that I am really committed to is truth. And astrology can show us aspects of the picture that we might not otherwise be able to see, or that we might be limited in seeing because of our own perspectives. And right now, with Neptune at the 29th degree of Pisces, everything is sort of a hologram right now. The energy is still in flux. So regardless of how you fall on the political spectrum, red, blue, purple, nothing, this verdict marks a pivotal moment, not just for Trump and his own personal and political future, but also for the broader landscape of American politics. This is beyond unprecedented. So, with that said, I want to take a look at the astrology of it all. The moment they came back and they said that they had a verdict was an interesting moment astrologically. And so we'll look at that. Then we're going to look at July 11th, which is his sentence hearing. And I found out that it's set on the docket for 11 a.m. Eastern time. And so I have a chart for that. We'll look at that. And, July 11th is a particularly noteworthy date. On this day, we have a really powerful alignment of Uranus and Mars. Saturn and the Sun are in an interesting trine aspect. The moon is moving back and forth between an opposition from Saturn to an opposition to Neptune. There is a moment of reckoning on July 11th that we are going to see. This is an alignment that indicates truth, that indicates justice. We'll look at Pluto's involvement, and significant decisions are going to be made public. For Donald Trump, whose chart is dominated by a Gemini sun and a Leo ascendant, there are transits that activate his natal Mars, which is associated with action, conflict, assertiveness. It's kind of like that hold your sword energy. And the influence of Uranus and Mars on his natal Mars, on his ascendant, on his midheaven is striking. So we are going to talk about the details of that. And even if you don't know anything about astrology, there are nuggets in this that I think you can take away, and that will be interesting to you, enlightening to you. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the chart that I have up for May 30th, 2024 at 4:20 p.m., which is the moment the jury announced they had a verdict. At that moment, we have Libra rising over the east horizon, and we have Eris setting in the west. And Libra is the sign of justice. It's the sign of balance, fairness, equity, harmony. And so that is what we're focusing on. Now, the West is Aries, and Aries is the sign of fighting the good fight. And Aries is ruled by Mars, and Mars is right there. Oh my God, it is right there on the horizon line. It is so poetic. And not only that, we have Mars in a very tight conjunction sitting right next to Eris. Eris is a little dwarf planet, a little but mighty, small but mighty. And Eris is on the periphery of Pluto, just outside the orbit of Pluto. And so she's one of the dwarf planets and one of the Plutoids. Eris and Mars are right next to each other. Now, mythologically, these are brother and sister. And because Eris is in Aries and Mars is in its own sign, it is very, very happy. So Mars is a fighter today. Mars is not going down without a fight. It's fighting along with Eris, who is the goddess of discord. And Eris represents progressive change. Anything that we need to do to disrupt the system for right action to take place, for some kind of change. Eris doesn't have a lot of judgment in terms of what the outcomes are. Her purpose is like, let's shake things up and get to some core truth. Eris is very instrumental in the charts of major movements within gender equality, within women's rights, within reproductive rights, abortion, those kinds of things. And Eris is also really prominent in the charts of people who will be willing to lose almost everything to fight for a cause. And Eris in this chart, to me, represents Stormy Daniels, the one who had the courage to step forward. I mean, you hear stories about mythological Eris, and she's like dancing on tables and she's throwing fruit. She's like, that saying that well-behaved women rarely make history. Yeah, that's Eris. She's like, you're not going to behave and you're going to be celebrated for it. And so I look at this Eris placement and I think this is the embodiment of Stormy Daniels. She, her testimony was so authentic. There is no way, from what I hear from news reporters who were right there and from following this case, there is no way that you could listen to her and not feel like she's telling the truth. She's an authentic person. And it was her testimony that was the linchpin in this whole case. And obviously Michael Cohen's too, but it was really hers that went in depth to talk about his character and the kind of man he was, and to really be honest and truthful about the ways in which he was using his power to get what he wanted and the ways in which he was trying to silence others in the process of it. So Stormy Daniels is Eris, and Mars is conjunct Eris. And so Mars says, I'm fighting the good fight. And Eris says, oh, but you're fighting it along with me, and I'm all about protecting women. So Mars is at the midpoint of Chiron, which Chiron is this little planetoid that is the mentor, the healer, the one who comes in and says, here's an experience of suffering. Here's an experience of not belonging. Here's an experience of injustice. And what can we learn from this so that we don't do this in the future, or that we don't allow this to happen to future generations? How can we allow our pain and our suffering to be a mentor for us? And how can we use our experiences to help reduce the suffering of others? So Chiron is right there next to Mars. Mars is right there between Chiron and Eris. And so here we have a lot of like a moment of healing the trauma that many of us experienced when we heard that scathing Access Hollywood report. And what's interesting about this configuration is that we have all of these planets in Aries, which is the sign that is ruled by Mars. So it's a sign that relates to masculinity. And on the higher octave of this, we could look at this as like protecting women, protecting the future, protecting the country, as like the fierce protector, fierce advocate. On the other hand, we can look at this as Aries can be a show of toxic masculinity. It can be like the ego having its way, but there's a lot of healing involved in this whole picture. One other aspect I'm going to bring into this is that little asteroid Hygeia. I always call asteroids little. I think they're like really sweet, but little asteroid Hygeia, which is an asteroid that relates to hygiene, cleaning up. It also relates to healing, like on a physical level. And so Hygeia is part of this configuration too. It's right there. next to Chiron, next to Mars, next to Eris. And so here you have a whole cleanup of the patriarchy. Yes, that is the symbolism right there. Now, another piece of symbolism I wanted to bring into this is that we have, during the time when the jury is deliberating, all this, a nine and a half hour deliberation, and leading up to the announcement of their verdict, all of those Aries planets are right there visible on the Western horizon. And by the time they announce their verdict, those planets have gone into the sixth house. And so they are hiding. So all the work they did during those last few hours of deliberation, they go quiet and allow the verdict to be read without a lot of drama. The other thing that's striking about this chart is that the verdict was set when the rising was Libra. And so justice, fairness, balance was right there front and center, the priority, the focal point. And then by the time the verdict is read, Scorpio is now rising. So Scorpio is the truth teller. It is, let's get down beneath the surface and see what's hidden. It is, sort of take no prisoners. It is bringing what has been hidden into the light. And that's what this case arguably does. When the verdict is set, there's a lot of influence in the eighth house. And one thing in particular, the sun, Venus, Jupiter, there's several, 4 to 5 different planets in the eighth house. And eighth house is basically the sector in a chart that is everything this case involves. This case involves sex, sexuality, things that are hidden, deep psychology, psychological motivations, abuses of power, hush money, other people's money, shared resources. It's like things like mafia and organized crime. So these are all eighth house subjects. And the eighth house ultimately is the house that relates to what is dying and what is being reborn. And so what we have is all of this eighth house content, this eighth house trial, this eighth house subject coming into the light. And we really get to see, regardless of whether or not we want to believe it or whether or not we think it's fair, etc., we really get to see stories that have been long hidden coming into our awareness. And once we know something and once we see something, we cannot forget it. We can ignore it. We can choose to ignore it. But we cannot forget it. One other little influence that I wanted to point out about this astrology for the day of the verdict, that fateful day, is that the moon is in Pisces. And so Pisces is the healer, but it's the feeler. And Pisces wants to open us up to compassion. Pisces is very generous. The next applying aspect the moon makes shows us what's on the immediate horizon, like what is going to take place next. And Saturn is the planet that rules the Democratic Party. And so the moon gives it a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of a blessing. The moon is in a challenging relationship with the sun. So it's in its third quarter square. In the lunation cycle that starts at the new moon, every point of the lunation cycle features a different type of resonant energy. The third quarter phase is when a lot of the busyness of the lunation cycle happens. It's when you have had the full moon, so you can see all the energy that needs to be cleared. You can see things clearly. You can see things fully in their essence. And the third quarter stage is when you say, okay, you know what? This is what I need to let go of at the time of pruning, at the time of cutting back. And it's a time of like all the activity you need to get ready for a new cycle. And then it starts to subside as the moon gets dark and as it goes into its new moon phase. It's the start of a new cycle. And so the third quarter phase usually shows us what needs to be cleaned up and cleared away. Pluto is an interesting character too. Pluto is in Aquarius, but it's moving backward. Now, Pluto in Aquarius is where we're going. It's showing us glimpses of what we are moving toward. And Pluto goes back into Capricorn from September to November 19th. And then it's in Aquarius fully for the next 20 years. So Pluto is saying, here is what's ahead of us. Here is the future. But we've got to go back and we've got to clean up house. And what are we cleaning up? We're cleaning up house in Capricorn matters. Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn has been marked by a number of really historical events that relate to the misuse and abuse of power and wealth and money. And we first saw this in 2008 during the bank bailouts, during Occupy Wall Street and that movement, when we gained a really clear picture about the inequities within our economic systems and the ways that government was complicit in that. In particular, the ways that corporations fund campaigns, the ways that our campaign financing is influenced by those big businesses, by corporations, and by the wealthy elite. So we saw a lot of this Pluto and Capricorn stuff, and it's not unlike what was happening in the last iteration of Pluto and Capricorn, which was right before the American Revolution. And so here in America, we had a big movement leading toward the American Revolution, looking at the injustice of tariffs, looking at no taxation without representation. And so you could see the buildup of those shifts that took place when Pluto entered Aquarius back in the 1700s. You also saw that in the 1500s and the 1300s when Pluto was at that transition point between Capricorn and Aquarius. So we have a precedent for this kind of thing. And Pluto is saying, I need to go back and I need to finish business. So I bring all of this up because Pluto is really loud, not just in this astrology for the 30th, but also for the astrology of July 11th, the sentencing hearing. Pluto is in a very nice flowing aspect with Jupiter and Sedna, which is another dwarf planet, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But Pluto and Jupiter, Pluto is saying, I am going to transform. I'm going to right the wrongs that I haven't finished yet in Capricorn before I fully enter a new sign. And I'm going to use Jupiter, which is judges, which is the judicial system. I'm going to use that to accomplish my aims. Now, Sedna relates to Jupiter. She's right next to Jupiter, and she's involved in this Pluto-Jupiter conversation. Let me talk about Sedna for a second. I love Sedna. I love the myth of Sedna. I love astrological Sedna. Sedna represents the magic working with our unconscious energy. She represents women who defy the societal norms, of who create their own power, their own life. It's about resourcing your own inner power. Now, the myth of Sedna is that Sedna was tricked into marrying a guy who turned out to be a really bad guy. He was good until they got married, and then he was very abusive. He was a bad guy. And her dad tried to rescue her. And so her dad had her on a boat, and then they were attacked by this guy, and there was a big fight that broke out. And the dad, instead of protecting her, he threw her off the boat to save himself. But what happened to Sedna is that she turned into this beautiful sea goddess, and she discovered that she could work with magic. And so she really embodied her own power. She took the experience of betrayal, of abandonment, of abuse, and she recreated herself, and she rose from the ashes. So think about this in, the mythology of this moment. Sedna could be the American people. Sedna could be the Republican Party. Jupiter rules the Republican Party, and Jupiter is right there next to Sedna. Sedna could be the influence that comes and transforms through the judicial process, these Pluto and Aquarius, Pluto and Capricorn themes. Sedna could also be the mysterious goddesses, the women who have been involved in bringing this case to light. So Sedna's influence is very powerful. Now, I could talk a lot more about this moment. This is a defining moment. This is an archetypal moment. Now, I could keep talking about this moment in history for hours. There's a lot to unpack with this chart, but I want to look forward. So this is part of our future report. Dun, dun, dun. Here we go. Here's our future report. So for our future report, we're going to skip ahead. June, there's a lot happening in June. It's a very interesting month. And I'm going to circle back around to some of what you can do, because we're going to talk about that magic, election magic. We're going to talk a little bit about some practices that you can embody this month and specific times to do that. But I wanted to show you the chart and talk about some of the influences for the sentencing hearing. You asked me about this on TikTok and on Instagram, and I'm a people pleaser. So I aim to please. I don't want to leave you hanging. And I want to promise those of you who also asked for us to explore the charts of the election and Biden, and, we are going to have a whole election episode. I have reached out to several of my dearest astrology, psychic, spiritual friends, and we're going to do a whole episode just about that. And people from different perspectives and different sides of the aisle. So don't worry, this is not a show that alienates anybody. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to look at that day and look at some of the things that are taking place. And a couple of noteworthy pieces of astrological news. During that day, two big things are happening. So the trial starts with Venus in the last degree of Cancer. And it also starts with the moon in a sort of opposition with Saturn and Neptune. By the end of the day, Venus is in Leo and the moon is in a within 2 degrees of a complete opposition with Neptune. So there's a big shift that's taking place throughout the day that we're going to definitely feel. There is also a kite aspect pattern, and it really just looked like a big kite in the middle of the chart. And a kite shows that there is motion forward, there is direction, and there's just enough tension to get things moving and get things moving relatively fast. So this is likely going to be a case that reaches a resolution within a reasonable time frame. And that's what starts the day. We started in a really focused way. Why I brought up Venus is that Venus is the planet that relates to balance, fairness, equity, and Venus doesn't quite know where to put her focus. And so the very first part of the day is like, well, what's the right thing to do? There's deliberation. There's not a lot of clarity. When a planet is at 29th degree, it is like not quite in the new cycle, but it's finished with the old one. So it's like, I don't know where to be. I don't know where to put my focus. And Venus is also in a lovely trine aspect to Neptune, which can indicate compassion. It can indicate trying to see from the other's perspective. It can indicate that there's a level of generosity here. Venus will oppose Pluto, so it moves into Leo and it moves toward an opposition with Pluto throughout that day, just a little while after that trial starts. And Venus opposite Pluto is, like an old no holds bar kind of influence. Venus opposite Pluto is also obsession about how much we're spending or how much we're not spending. So I think it indicates signs for sure. We have Neptune, Saturn, and Pluto all going retrograde, moving back. And Neptune and Pluto are these evolutionary planetary energies. So they relate to the bigger shifts that are taking place in the world. And remember what we said about Pluto. Pluto is showing us a glimpse of where it's going, but it says, I have to go back. I have to clean house before I enter that new sign. Neptune's doing the same thing. And Neptune represents anything related to deception or illusion. Actually, Neptune, even in Neptune and Pisces, can relate to cult leaders and the ways in which people motivate through storytelling and through spiritual. Neptune can also relate to cult leaders and the ways that we don't see the truth of who someone is because they can tell such a good story. Neptune is at the last degree of Pisces. And this is a 14-year cycle that it's wrapping up, and it will wrap up fully by 2026. And so Neptune shows us what is inauthentic within our media, within spiritual and religious traditions because of its placement in Pisces. Neptune also is introducing us to the stories. Neptune is also reminding us of the stories we've bought into and the stories we've told for the last 14 years and the ways in which those stories are flawed. And I think we could say that politics is storytelling. It is what is the best way to motivate someone's heart? It's to tell them stories. It's to get them to buy into your story. Neptune in Pisces is shining a light on the ways in which we are being deceived. We also have Mars and Uranus very close together, and Mars is in Taurus. So it is not in its happiest sign. So it doesn't really want to fight. It wants more to try to harmonize differences, to come to an agreement. But Uranus is there saying things are a little unsettled, things are a little erratic. I'm pulling in Donald Trump's astrology right now. Uranus and Mars are both hugging his midheaven. This is the point of his reputation. This is his career. This is his legacy. And so there's a lot of instability shaking up that area of his life. And anything that touches the midheaven also touches the fourth house, the IC, which is the home and the family. So there is a restriction of freedom associated with Uranus oppositions, Uranus squares. There is also just, like I said, instability, erratic, unpredictable, sudden changes, sudden upsets, and overall change. And Mars is challenging his Mars, Uranus is challenging his Mars. So this shows me the state of the event, which is his freedom is being compromised. His freedom is being challenged. Interestingly, we also have Neptune right on his Vesta. And so this represents home. And Neptune can be just like shining a light into the home environment. It wouldn't surprise me if there was things that were happening with his family, if his children were being brought in, for example, or if we're finally hearing from Melania, where is she, by the way? Or if there was something like house arrest. I have a hard time seeing incarceration, jail, but I can see something happening where he's got some sort of limitation, some sort of confinement. And I want to say too, before I go much further, that anytime I'm looking at astrology in a forecasting way or in a predictive way, I am aware of the fact that astrological signatures can represent multivalent symbolic meanings. And so I don't like to give absolute predictions of this is what is going to happen. Energy changes, and that there is free will, that there is the collective beliefs and collective thoughts that we are holding influences the way things play out. There we go. I gave my caveat. Now let's get back to it. So one really important point about the astrology for the hearing is Saturn's involvement in Trump's chart. Saturn is at a point we call the bendings of the nodes, the north and south nodes. The north and south nodes are kind of like our hero or heroine's journey. They're where we start and where we go and find the elixir and come back. The north node being that point that is our destiny, what we are here to experience and move toward, but it's way outside of our comfort zones. And the south node being what kind of karmic we are here to move through and to heal. The north and south node were exactly at the same point as Donald Trump's north and south node, meaning he was having his nodal return almost exactly the day of the 2020 election, that November day. That's a big moment, first of all. It happens every 19, almost 19 years. And so that is a moment of like your date with destiny, like a moment of reckoning. Well, transiting Saturn is at the square point, the 90-degree point between the north and south node. I'm like, if you saw my face right now, I have my mouth open, my jaw is dropped. This is a big, big moment because Saturn is standing there as a threshold guardian saying, are you following the highest activation of your north node path? Saturn is also the planet of just desserts. It is the planet of consequences. And if you've been doing the right thing and you have been following your path, if you've been aligned, then Saturn gives you a reward. It says, you know what? You've worked hard. Here you go. Here is recognition. Here is an opportunity. Here is money, something very tangible. But if you haven't been following the rules, then Saturn says, okay, here's a consequence for you. Here is punishment. Saturn transits can be really challenging. And Saturn at that threshold guardian state right there is challenging every decision that was made relating to that election. point when the North Node was at Donald Trump's North Node and his Sun at 20 to 22 degrees Gemini. Saturn is challenging that decision. It's making us look back in time. Saturn's in a nice flowing aspect with the Sun, but it's opposing the Moon. And so, so I think that this could indicate some grace. This could indicate some compassion being shown to him. Trump is moving out of his Venus return as Venus moves toward Leo. And so he's got some support. He's got some people rallying behind him leading up to this day. I'm sure he'll have a really successful fundraising campaign all about this. Now, Jupiter is an interesting player here too, because Jupiter is the legal field. It's your judges. And Jupiter's sitting up in his 10th house, which can relate to the outcome of a court case and people who are in positions of authority. So Jupiter is blessing him. He's got some blessings. He's got some help. He's got some support. And so I think that he won't have the real severe consequences like major jail time or thing. I think there will be some leniency here, probably more than many who want to see justice are comfortable with, but there will still be enough of a punishment to be clear that we can't allow that we as a country, as a justice system, can't stand back and allow people to commit crimes without having repercussions. So July 11th is a very monumental moment for us watching this and also for Trump. And so, so we will see how it plays out. Now, I promised you I would talk about the election magic. And so here's the thing. Whenever two or more people gather and work to shift energy of some kind, that energy, and now here is my election magic secrets. Whenever two or more people are gathered together in a ritual or in some kind of intention setting event or some kind of spiritual practice, prayer, meditation, that energy between them isn't just multiplied by 2 or 3 or however many people are there. It is exponentially increased. So if you are holding any kind of prayer ceremonies, ritual practices, new moon, full moon, solstice, etc., events for the presidential election, for the Trump hearing, for anything involving the political landscape, for Rafah, for Israel, for anything that is taking place globally, it's better. You have more bandwidth if you're gathering with people. Now you can gather on Zoom, you can gather just, on the phone, you can gather in real life. However you do it, your magic is exponentially more powerful when you're doing it with others. So that leads me to an invitation. I have a couple of events coming up that do just that. We have one on the summer solstice, which is June 20th, and that is going to be a election magic. So we have a couple of special events coming up. On the solstice, June 20th, I'm going to be holding a ceremony, an intention setting ceremony, a solstice ceremony, where we can all bring our collective intentions for our own personal lives. So there's some for our own personal lives, which, is always a good thing to do. And then also for what we want to see taking place with the shape of the world, the state of the world. So I have a couple of special events that I want to invite you to. One is that on the solstice, June 20th, I am going to be holding a group ritual, bring your personal intentions. And also we're going to be offering some collective intentions for the state of the world. This is going to be a very powerful moment. This solstice is taking place the day before the Capricorn new moon. And the Capricorn Cancer axis line is the axis line of creation that has a form to focus itself into. So Cancer being that creative influence, being the nurturing influence that is pure, raw, creative energy, creative flow. And then Capricorn is the structure, the scaffolding that gives that creative energy a focal point and a direction. So that is going to be happening. And so join us for that special event. Then in September, so this is just a couple of months before the election, I'm going to be gathering with you in New York, in Rhinebeck, at the sacred and incredible Omega Institute. Omega is one of the most beautiful and sacred spaces I've ever been to. And that is a week-long workshop called Working with Magic, or Modern Day Magic, I'm sorry. My first one was Working with Magic. This is my third time teaching at Omega, and it is actually my fourth time teaching at Omega. And we have life-changing experiences working with ritual, working with magic, learning how to access your own power to change and shape your life. So join us for those events. And one other little secret I'll give you about election magic, or any kind of time you're working with magic in that way, is that we want to focus not what is on the problem. I don't want that person in office. I don't want to give that person any more time. But what we want to focus on is we really want to focus on the desires that are so deep in our heart that want to manifest and that want to come to fruition. So we want to focus more attention on what we want to see taking place. And we want to feed that with passion, with emotion, with, all of the joy and the lifting up and the praise that we can. There is a relationship between emotion and manifestation. The deeper we feel about something, and the more excited and enthused we are, the more energy we are feeding that intention. I'm going to do a whole episode just about this. And that was what I was going to talk about today. And I just gave you a little preview, a little hint of what's to come. But, that is the one thing I have seen the most important factor in any of my ritual practices. Am I feeling it? And that's something that I teach as well. So there you go. Wow, this went by fast. Well, if you all have questions, if you want to, reach out, please feel free to. I am always available and I love hearing from you. So thank you, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. I'm grateful for you.